Hello and welcome to the Physical Preparation Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Robertson, and today we're going to be talking about 10 components of successful basketball strength and conditioning. So really excited to talk about this. As you guys probably know, I was a huge basketball fan growing up. Absolutely loved the game. Definitely wasn't the most physically imposing person in my youth. Really didn't feel like until I got into, my mid-teens when we got that first weight room. I was 15 years old, a little bit later than most schools these days, but finally got in the weight room, finally got to doing a little bit of real strength and conditioning work, that I started to see not only my body evolve, but my game evolve as well. And so that's a big part of the reason I'm so passionate about this. Like, I wish I would have had a strength and conditioning coach when I was younger to help me understand how to take care of my body, how to improve my performance. But it's a shame now, because I feel like more and more kids, more and more players coming up have access to these resources, but they're still not getting the training that they need. So it's really frustrating. And, man, I see it all, because I've got high-level pros, I've got college kids, I've got high school kids, and it's really frustrating because I still see the same programs that we were putting out there 15, 20 years ago. So it's like I have to make a couple notes here. If you train basketball players, number one, they're not football players, right? They don't need to be on the football strength and conditioning program. Number two, just because a kid is skinny doesn't mean they necessarily need to bulk up or get strong. Maybe they do. There is a time and a place for that. Don't get me wrong. There are guys and girls out there that are too skinny or they are too weak, but don't use that as this blanket approach to basketball strength and conditioning. It's frustrating when I hear that. So let's strive to be a little bit better, dig a little bit deeper, and figure out what an athlete really needs to be successful. And, as we go through these, just keep in mind, you don't have to agree with me on all of this. I'm just going to share my experiences, share the things that I've had success with over the years. But I also think, because I am biased and because I've been doing this for a while, not just in sports, but especially in basketball, that the more of these that you incorporate into your programming, the more success you'll see. So no real sponsor this week. I would tell you, if you're interested in what I'm doing, definitely check out ifastbasketballinsiders.com. It is going to be a one-stop shop for great continuing education. If you're a private sector, high school, collegiate strength and conditioning coach that works in the basketball space, I really feel like it's going to move the needle and help you become a better basketball program designer, coach, and clinician overall. So definitely check that out. We're going to launch June 1st. So if you're interested in this topic, or you just want to learn more about basketball S&C, definitely go there, get on that insiders list. So without any further ado, let's talk about 10 components of successful basketball strength and conditioning. Number one, very important, strength is protective. Okay. And I want to talk about this in a couple different lights, because I think too often people just think of strength as a way to develop outputs, right? So jumping higher, running faster, and those are all fantastic reasons to strength train. But if you listen to my show with Cam Joss last week, one of the things that he talks about, and something that I'm a believer in as well, and I've become a bigger believer in over the years, is that there is an element of these outputs that we need to chase with jumps, with throws, with sprint training, right? So with more neural-based elements than just the weight room. But I think too often people hear that and they say, oh, well, I don't need to lift weights anymore. That's absolutely not the case. Strength is protective. It can help make your athletes more resilient and more robust. So there's a couple key components here. When I'm thinking about strength training being protective, number one, I'm thinking from a global perspective, helping your athletes move better. And one of the most important things you can do is shifting their center of gravity back. So virtually every basketball player I work with is pitched forward. And there's certain advantages to that. Inherently, it's advantageous to kind of be pushed forward, because that helps you accelerate a little bit faster. But what that does, two things that are negative. Number one, it makes it inherently harder to slow yourself down and decelerate. But also, it makes it a little bit more directive, or a little bit more focal in the way that you're loading your body. So you have this tendency to overload your knees, maybe put more stress on your Achilles. So when we shift your center of gravity back, it gives you the ability to distribute forces more effectively. And we'll talk more about that later. So we've got a global perspective of just helping you move better, but you can also use proper strength training to maintain or even build mobility. And this is something that I learned way back in the day when we were talking about like Olympic lifting, instead of just power lifts, Olympic lifts. And these Olympic lifters, I was like, dude, they move so well, at least compared to a lot of the power lifters that I knew and was working with at the time. But what Olympic lifters inherently understood was that if you have access to a full range and then you work and load through a full range, you maintain that full range of motion. Versus what you see in a lot of powerlifting environments is that over time, you progressively lose range. So you squat lower, or you squat higher, right? Maybe instead of going through a full range bench press, you do a floor press or a board press. So progressively, you lose range of motion. So this is something that's so critical for basketball players. If you want to build or even maintain your mobility, figure out how to use the appropriate strength training exercises to help you do that. Two really key targeted areas that I'm locked in on are the knees and the calves. When we're talking about knees, I want quads. I want quad strength, but I also need glutes. I need the hamstrings. I need the soleus. I need all those muscles working in concert to protect my knees. And then obviously you're hearing about all of these big name players that are dealing with Achilles issues, or they're missing playoff games because of their Achilles. So when I'm looking at somebody's Achilles, I'm thinking about local foot and ankle mobility. Again, I'm looking at how they distribute force through their entire lower leg, and then gastroc strength, soleus strength. There's a lot of reasons to be in the gym, building up those key areas like your quads, like your calves. And then last but not least, there is that element of armor building. And I know armor is kind of like a buzzy, catchy type phrase, but whatever works for your athletes. If you say, hey, we need to put a little armor on you, just make you a little bit more resilient. If that resonates with them, and if it gets them in the gym more consistently and working hard, then I think it puts you in a better position as their coach and program designer to have some success. So that's number one. The first component is to realize that strength is protective. But number two, you have to pick the right exercises. And I think this is one of the points of frustration for me, because again, I've really kind of jumped back into building up some of these younger kids that I work with, because I've had pros almost exclusively for the last 6-7 years, a couple like college kids, very few high school. And so I'm kind of almost coming full circle. I've still got my pros, but as I get these younger kids, man, it's so frustrating when I see they're doing the same programs that they've been doing for 10, 15, 20 years. So guys, please, if you're listening to this, I realize sometimes the high school strength and conditioning environment isn't ideal for training all of your athletes. You maybe can't individualize or personalize to the same degree. But for the love of God, can we please stop just cleaning, back squatting, and bench pressing these guys? There's more to it than that. And again, it's just such a narrow focus on what performance really is. And again, if I can really target in on one, can we please stop back squatting these guys? I mean, I've got kids that are 6'7", 6'8", 6'9". There's absolutely no reason for that person to back squat. And the second you put a bar on their back, their squat absolutely looks atrocious. But you give them maybe a kettlebell in the front, you give them a little bit of heels elevation, 1 or 2 good cues, boom. Now they're squatting very clean, right? Through a fuller range of motion. So when I talk about picking the right exercises, I love goblet squats. I love front foot elevated split squats, especially initially. It helps shift them back. It teaches them to change levels. You really unlock the ankle and the knee on the front side. You're unlocking the hip on the back side. You're creating this hip separation. So again, they can distribute forces better. Love step ups. Fantastic tool for teaching athletes how to feel their whole foot and push. So many of the basketball players that I work with, maybe they're good off one leg or they're good off 2 legs, but they're also really bad off of one leg. And they'll tell you, oh man, I never want to go off my right. So instead of jumping in and trying to teach them to jump off their right leg right away, maybe I can just teach them better movement mechanics on that right leg first. And a step up, fantastic exercise for that. Push-ups, again, great total body exercise. People want to poo-poo it. Maybe it's not as fun or exciting as a bench press, but hey, we're integrating the entire body. We're getting a good reach. So we're opening up that back, which will help shift center of gravity back. Great stuff there. Floor presses. Hey, sometimes I want to build strength, but maybe I don't want to go to a full, barbell bench press, or maybe their shoulders are a little bit cranky. Hey, I can go with a floor press, generally alternating, shorten up the range a little bit, still build some strength. And depending on how you cue it, if you coach and cue a floor press the right way, man, you can get some abs in there. You can get some hamstrings. You can get a lot of good stuff. So I'm all for strength training, right? It is protective. And I'm all for developing strength as long as it's not, ruining their ability to move, right? That's really what it comes down to. Strength in and of itself is not a problem. Strength without concern for how they move or their ability to do what they do on a court is a problem. Okay? So at the end of the day, yes, you need strength. Yes, you need armor. Yes, you need to be protective, because here's the most important thing. Number 3, they need enough juice to play. Now, I understand that's very nebulous. That's very open-ended. And I leave it like that for a reason. Because, look, if you came into my gym and you saw all the basketball players that I worked with, even if you have never trained somebody in the NBA, chances are you can walk around my gym and say, yeah, that guy, he's probably played in the NBA. Like if you see Glenn Robinson walk into the gym and you see him move, right? You see how he carries himself. You see the guy do something totally, benign and basic, like a leg extension. You can look at this guy's quads, right? The level of definition, the way, just his body looks, he's got the juice, right? And so maybe you can't do it to the same level that I can, because again, I've been doing this for a while now, but I can generally tell you just by looking at a kid, doing a little bit of testing, a little bit of movement, I can tell you, okay, this kid's probably tapped out physically at a high school level. Maybe they're tapped out at a collegiate level. And then there's some guys that just got juice, right? So I got a high school kid in right now. This kid literally cleared the vertex, right? If you guys have a vertex, it goes up to 12 feet. I mean, 12 feet is not challenging, which is crazy for this kid. He literally came in my gym last week and touched 12, 3.5. I'm just telling you, that kid's got the juice to go play in the NBA. All right. So the way I think about this, there's a couple analogies that I like that might resonate with you. Number 1, cups, right? When you're thinking about outputs, if somebody's got enough juice to play at a certain level, right? There's Dixie cups, right? There's like regular size cups, and then there's like huge beer steins. So when you're looking at your athletes, which kind of cup are they? How much motor potential do they have? Probably a better one, and one that most of my athletes like, is like a car's analogy. Okay. So if you got Glenn, right? I mean, again, this guy won a dunk contest. I think he touched like 12.4 when he was at Michigan. My dude's a Ferrari, right? Even by NBA standards, he is a Ferrari. And so it's very hard to create that in the gym. In fact, it's impossible, right? There's genetics involved. There's the right training involved. So then you kind of got to know, okay, what kind of car do I have? And then as a strength coach, hey, man, if I got a Honda, there's certain things I can do to a Honda, right? And I'm not the biggest car guy, but hey, man, maybe I can put a different chip in it and crank up the horsepower, and I can use a different kind of exhaust. There's all kinds of things that you can do to tweak it and manipulate it and maybe get a little bit more juice, but just realize you can't turn a Honda into a Ferrari. Just not how it works. Okay. So whatever level they want to play at, it's your job to try and match those outputs. And this one of the times it can be hard to be a coach, because there are certain people that you come across and you're like, man, this is like the best person. I love this guy, this girl, but their level that they're aspiring to play at, they just physically don't have what it needs to play at that level. Okay. But it's our job to try and match it as high as we can. Right. And if somebody wants to level up, hey man, we might have to push things a little bit in your training to get you to where you want to go. I don't know if we can get there, but we're going to give it our best shot. Okay. So remember, whatever level they aspire to, they need enough juice to play at that level. Number 4, I think this is really important. I just think this is something we need to be talking more about, but at this day and age, sport-specific movement training is non-negotiable, especially when it comes to basketball. And shout out to the GOAT when it comes to this stuff, Lee Taft. I absolutely love Lee. I love his little breakdowns that he's been putting on Instagram lately, breaking down different guys' movements, how they play, how they use pace or how they use different footwork to be great at what they do. But when it comes to training basketball players, there's certain skills that they need to learn how to do. Now, we've got global movements, right? Acceleration, change of direction, lateral movements, all that stuff. We've got the global perspectives, but now there's nuance that's tied into playing basketball and playing basketball at a high level. So we need to teach our athletes how to accelerate quickly, straight ahead, at angles. How do they accelerate from a more static position versus a more bouncy and elastic where they have to reposition or use a plyo step to get things going. But they got to learn how to accelerate. They got to learn how to close out and decelerate. Man, I can't tell you, across the board, high school, college, pros, almost no player that I work with in recent memory has been able to close out effectively, right? They've all been taught the same thing. They sprint, a quarter to half the way, then they're chopping on their toes for 38 steps to stop in a 5-foot radius. Like, guys, that is so slow. They know it. They know that it's slow. They feel it, but they don't have a better strategy. So that's where we come in and teach them, hey, sprint out hard, find your heels. Once you find your heels, that's going to help slow down your momentum, and then you're nice and balanced when you finish. So we teach them to close out and decelerate effectively. We teach them how to shuffle laterally run. We give them context for when they might use each of those. So if you're just shuffling, hey, this is you staying in front of a guy. They're not really trying to push, but hey, somebody gets a corner on you. Now you have to hip turn. Maybe the shuffle's not enough. Now you got to hip turn and sprint, right? Or laterally run to try and cut that guy off. Okay. So you got lateral movements, you got backpedaling, you've got the ability to jump off one or two legs. And this is something I love to talk about with my athletes is, in early days when we're first getting them in the gym, I just had a new kid start this week. And we had this same discussion of, what kind of jumper are you? Are you a 1 foot? Are you a 2 foot? And, like a lot of them, he either prefers going off his left, going off 2, doesn't want to go off his right. So I'm always thinking in the back of my mind, not only how is that impacting his game, but what does that tell me about how they move? And so this is something that I love nerding out on. I know Bill's talking a lot about the foot and finding those clean lines and those clean abilities to push through the foot and redirect forces back up. So I'm looking at the foot. I'm looking at it from a pelvic floor perspective. How can we get that pelvic floor to ascend and come back up and redirect forces so they can push? And, whether it's vertically or horizontally, right? Because a lot of the athletes I work with don't like pushing off their right leg. So you got to bake in to their workouts, this sport specific movement. And ultimately, I think part of our job as strength and conditioning coaches, hopefully we're moving away from that term. I love the term physical preparation coach, but as physical preparation, let me try that again. As physical preparation coaches, there's more to it than just getting in the gym and getting strong. We have to teach them how to move. And this is where you need this global perspective and this global understanding of how movement should look and feel. But then if you're really going to dive in and specialize in a sport, you got to be able to relate it back to, okay, how does this apply to you on a basketball court, on a baseball field, on a soccer pitch? And the more you can do that, the better success you're going to have. Okay. Component number 5 is to make your conditioning worthwhile. And man, I'll just be honest. I see too many guys, girls, kids, adults that are just out there crushing themselves, hoping to improve their conditioning, and it's just not working. They're just killing themselves. They're trying to do like Tabata type stuff or just straight high intensity glycolytic circuits, or they're going high intensity every day they're on the court. And then they wonder, like, why do I not feel fit? Why do I not feel fresh? Why does my body feel beat up all the time? So, when it comes to this stuff, one of the first things that I will talk about, and shout out to Charlie Francis, who really pioneered the whole high-low approach. And then Daniel Bove has come in and talked about how he uses this in a basketball context, but just introducing the concept of high and low intensity days to your workouts. So most of the guys and gals that I work with are either 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or they'll go Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday is incredibly easy, right? Hey, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, we're going to go pretty hard in the gym. You can get on the court immediately after. You can do whatever you want. And then on your off days, whether it's on your own, whatever, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, we're going to go and just get shots up. Or you're going to do some lower intensity cardio on those days. Work on any specific movement issues that you might have. Easy. If we're doing more of like a Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday approach, a lot of times Monday, Thursday will be lighter on-court days. The lift will be a little bit more upper body focused. We'll focus more on acceleration on the movement side, because then we know Tuesday, Friday, those are going to be our highest intensity days. We're going to hit legs pretty hard. We're going to get on the court. Maybe that's going to be your change of direction day. Maybe those are going to be the days where you're doing a lot of starting, stopping. Maybe you're going to play on those days. So really trying to consolidate that stress. But one of the things that I'm trying to kind of impose upon my athletes is that they need a big aerobic base. And so different new guy started this week, and he was like, hey man, I'm not going to get on the court today. I'd really like to get some conditioning in. It was the first day of the week. So I just said, hey, look, I know tomorrow you're going to be on the court more. You're going to be getting after it. All I want you to do is do your regular workout, and let's do some tempo intervals on the bike. So everybody's familiar with tempo runs. Fantastic, right? It's like a 1-to-5, 1-to-6 work to rest ratio. So you could absolutely do that, but he didn't want to run that day. Why stress some of the joints if you don't have to? You just want the general aerobic effect. So we actually just put him on a fan bike. Set up the timer, 15 on, 45 off. And I just said, hey, go at about 70, 75%, right? Enough to get a good sweat going. And then on that 45-second break, really just kind of keep the pedals moving, right? Let the heart rate recover, work on trying to breathe as fully and as deeply as you can. Because I know if we do that now, if we're doing that in May, man, when it gets to July, August, September, when it really matters for this guy, he's going to have this massive aerobic base. And he's going to get up and down the court maybe for minutes at a time. But when he does get that break, his heart rate is going to be able to come down drastically. He's going to get that oxygen going that his body needs. And ultimately, he's going to be able to recover faster. So, just a super general rule here, but don't feel like in May, you have to be killing yourself. If you don't have to play an actual game until October or November, right? Start easy, start general, build that really big aerobic base first, and then start to get more intense and more specific as the off season goes on. Number 6, learn to distribute forces. Now I'm going to say this, and I'm going to put a caveat on it, because I don't want somebody to go out there and say, Mike Robertson said the only reason that we're seeing knee and Achilles issues is because people can't distribute force well. It's not the only reason, but I do think it's a big part of the reason, right? When we're talking about like patellar tendinopathy or knee pain, when we're talking about Achilles tendinopathy or Achilles issues, these are incredibly multifactorial problems, right? Just like we talked about with Cam. We're looking at hamstrings. There's a lot of reasons that people pull hamstrings in football or in professional soccer. So the same thing applies here, but I do think this ability to distribute forces is very, very important. So a lot of times what you see in sports is an anterior weight shift. So if you're listening to this in your car, you probably can't do it. But if you're just moving around, walking around, cleaning the house, whatever the case may be, I want you to stop just for a second. I want you to stand up. And I want you to shift your weight forward onto your toes. And if you do that, and if you can, close your eyes. And I want you to feel what happens. Because when you shift all that weight forward, immediately you start to feel your calf and your Achilles tighten up, right? It's trying to keep you, well, number one, it's pushing you forward, but number two, it's also trying to keep you from falling forward. But then when you shift everything forward, now you're putting an incredible amount of pressure on your knees. Okay? So when we talk about distributing force, one of the most important things that I like to do in the weight room is shifting somebody's center of gravity back. Okay? And we kind of talked about this up top, but just to reiterate, any activity that shifts somebody's center of gravity back will ultimately help them recruit their glutes and hamstrings better, right? So you don't have to do 30 million glute activation exercises. Like just teach somebody to shift their center of gravity back, stack their system more effectively, and you're going to get more hip involvement, more glute and ham involvement. It's just going to distribute the forces better. So this is where I really like front foot elevated activities. I really like heels elevated activities. I love push-ups. All of these things are important, but then this also can be baked into your movement training as well. So when we're talking about somebody decelerating, right? Let's think about somebody closing out. Instead of taking those 38 steps, in a 5-foot space, where you're just on your toes and tap, 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 trying to slow down. Now, hey, find your heels. So if you find your heels and you hit kind of that early propulsive foot position, you can transition into middle, right? It gives you time to slow down and it distributes the force. When you hit your heel, hey, now your glutes and hamstrings can turn on. They can control that motion and hopefully they can slow you down. It's just so much more effective. Not only is it faster, but it prevents your body from getting broken down as well. So when we talk about distributing force, I'm thinking about it from like a slow global movement perspective in the gym, but I'm also thinking about how can I incorporate this into my movement training to help my athletes do the things that they're going to do on the court more efficiently and more effectively. Number 7, find a player to model unless you're a one-of-one. Sorry, had to enjoy the Starbucks while it's still somewhat warm. Okay, so when I get a new athlete in the gym, one of the first questions I'm asking, if it's not on day 1, it's definitely on day 2, is whose game do you like? It's just a great talking point because every basketball player growing up models their game after somebody, right? They say, oh, this person is shaped kind of like me, or this person moves kind of like me, or I just kind of play with the same kind of pace or the same intensity of this player. So once they tell me that, now I'm starting to think, okay, if these things are fairly similar, how can we fit them into, or maybe even expand on that player's game based on their physical structure? So guy I was working with today, taller, slender guy, but I'm like, okay, well, whose game do you kind of emulate? He's like, well, I kind of play like Draymond. Okay, great. So now I'm trying to think, okay, if he really wanted to play exactly like Draymond, what would we have to do to his body, right? Would we have to add size? Would we have to bulk him up? Would we have to make him quicker? There's a lot of elements to that. But I think the best part of this, right, if you look at the NBA, maybe even 10 years ago, it's not to say there haven't been great players that understood pace. If you look at a guy like Steve Nash wasn't blowing people away with his speed, but he was shifty, right? He'd slow down, he'd accelerate, right? He understood pace and timing. But I think the best part about this is that there are more, I don't want to say slower guys, but there are more guys out there that are playing slower and maybe playing off 2 legs versus 1 than ever before. So if you're watching the playoffs right now, watch a guy like Jalen Brunson, right? And again, please don't take this as Mike Robertson is saying these people are not athletic, because they are. They are absolutely athletic. But what they are masters of is understanding pace, understanding their body, how to use their body, decelerating effectively. So if you look at a guy like Jalen Brunson, right? Absolutely just torching through the playoffs right now. He's fun to watch, right? Luka, obviously, Luka has incredible basketball IQ. So there are certain things that we're not going to be able to replicate or mimic. But when you look at them from an athletic perspective, these are things that a lot more of us can aspire to. Because look, coming back to our car analogy, if you're not a Ferrari, okay, but you want to play in the league, well, what can you do that distinguishes you, right? How can you play like some of these players that maybe aren't inherently just going to blow you away with speed and power and athleticism, but how can you find ways to model your game after theirs? And I think that's what's really exciting is now you're finding ways to, hey, slow yourself down, play off 2, get into somebody's body. Because, hey, man, everybody wants to be Anthony Edwards, right? Like I watch Anthony Edwards do what he does, and I'm like, this guy's phenomenal. He is absolutely phenomenal. And the scary thing about him is that he is as fast and as explosive as he is, but he's really starting to understand pacing as well. Right? So you watch him and he's talking about these slow steps and Euro steps and all of these things. So when you have a gas pedal like he does, and then you've got the brakes like he does, that's truly scary. It's like in Major League Baseball, the guy that can hit 100 on his fastball and then he can throw his changeup and it looks exactly the same and it's 70 miles an hour, right? Like that contrast is what can really make people elite. So you have to find a player to model. Now, I did put that caveat on that, unless you're a one-of-one. And I think this is what's interesting because, when KD came in the league, you don't see too many guys 6'11" moving and playing like a guard. And so I would say at the time he was a one-of-one, right? But now you watch some of these guys coming in, there wasn't a guy that moved like Zion before Zion. There wasn't a guy like Wemby who's 7'4", 7'5", and can handle the ball and shoot the 3 and get 3.5 blocks every game. So if you're like the rest of us, right? If you're like a normal human being, even if you're playing at the NBA, unless you are on this extreme range where you can just be your own unique person, I think it behooves you to try and find players to emulate, right? And then take the things that you like, look at the things that make them successful athletically, and then find ways to work that into your program. So find a player to model. I think it's going to make a huge difference. And look, if you're a Zion or a Wimby, good for you. That's amazing. I wish some of us would have hit that genetic lottery, but man, I think finding somebody to model can be really beneficial. Number 8, and I think this is really for the private sector strength coaches, but man, find ways to fill in the gaps. Component number 8, fill in the gaps. Because like it or not, high school strength and conditioning is a thing. Advanced PE, weights class, whatever they're calling it, where you're from. And maybe they don't have this, but this is something I've been competing with for like 20 years now. One of the first jobs that I interviewed for was at one of the major metropolitan high schools here in town. They were hiring a strength and conditioning coach. And this was one of the first jobs in this position, 22 years ago. And now basically every high school has a strength and conditioning coach. So just know and understand, if you're in the private sector, it's hard because you're not only competing against their schedule and their calendar for basketball, but you're also competing in some way against that strength coach, right? Because they're going to be doing certain things with them. So one of the things that I always try to do, and I know my good friend Andy McCloy has tried to do as well, is don't make it a competition. Instead, try and find synergy. So try and be that strength coach's best friend, because look, those strength coaches probably know, hey, I don't want to do, just the things that I'm doing, but I have to based on my constraints. I've got 30, 45, 60 people in this classroom all at once. So the programming maybe has to be a little bit cookie cutter. So that's where you go to that strength coach and say, hey, look, I got you. I understand this isn't what you want. Here's what I can do for you. Send your athletes to me once or twice a week. We'll do all the split stance and single leg work you don't have time for, you can't coach in queue. We'll do some of the speed training that maybe you don't have, the space or the resources for. We'll work on the deceleration training, the posterior chain work, the accessory and isolation work for the quads and calves. We can get in there and just do mobility and recovery work. But I think this is where private sector strength coaches can really shine. You just say, hey, look, when they go into that weight room, I know they're going to power clean, they're going to squat, they're going to bench press, they're going to do, these 5 or 6 things, and they're probably going to do them for an extended period of time because that's how you show progression, right? Or, I think we all know that's not the only way to show progression, but that's how a lot of coaches measure it. That's fine. But we can slide in here, we can fill in those gaps, and we can say, okay, they're getting some of the foundational stuff here. Here are all the little ways that I can sprinkle in really good stuff that's going to help my athletes not only move and feel better, but hopefully keep them on the court for a longer period of time as well. Okay, about to cough, didn't happen. Number 9, training the breaks. Now, I almost want to laugh when I talk about this because I understand that deceleration is important, that breaks are important, but it's just comical to me how these things really just become, at a fervor pitch in the fitness industry. Like, why is this such a novel thing? Why are all of a sudden everybody's talking about the breaks like it's the only thing we should be focusing on? Are they important? Yes, absolutely. But it's not like they just became important in the last 2 to 3 years, right? Breaks and deceleration training have always been important. So when we talk about this, yes, we need to do it. But here's what I also don't want you to assume. It's more than just one vector. So Matt Aldred, first off, shout out to Matt Aldred, who just got the head strength and conditioning coach with Michigan basketball. Dude, congrats for you, man. Awesome. I'm going to have to come up and check it out. But when Matt Aldred talks about doing drop landings, right? Fantastic exercise, fantastic tool. I'm sure Matt Aldred wouldn't tell you that's the only way to decelerate, right? So don't just think vertical. Think about horizontal. Think about lateral. So if we're talking about horizontal deceleration, think about your closeouts. How are you training deceleration in a closeout type movement or in some sort of linear acceleration? How do you decel on the back end of that? How are you building the brakes? If we're training side to side, how are you teaching your athletes to stop, come into a cut, come out of a cut? There's tons of ways you can do that, right? You can use resistance bands. You can use medicine ball throws. You can do lateral jumps and lands. There's so many different ways to do that. But please don't think it's just vertical. Think about, if you're really serious about training the brakes, how are you going to train the brakes vertically, horizontally, and laterally. Okay. I know it's a buzzword. That doesn't mean it's not important, but just respect the fact that if we're training the brakes, ultimately, I think we're going to help keep our athletes healthier. And again, we're going to improve their performance on the court. Last but not least, number 10, never forget to connect with the athlete. And if you've listened to my solo shows before, this is a common theme, right? We get very caught up in nerding out on the X's and O's, or, talking about program design or how the body works and posterior outlets. And, a lot of your athletes are like, dude, I don't care. Like, I just want to jump higher, run faster, be able to dunk, not get cooked by my boy when we get out there and open run here in a couple weeks. It's been really interesting because, the longer I do this, it's not all of them, but there's a certain segment of my athletes that literally just don't want to talk about basketball, like at all. And I learned this in the soccer space as well. Some athletes don't want to talk about their sport because the rest of their life is immersed, right? They go to practice, right? They're watching film. All their friends are from soccer or from basketball. So like they're just inundated and surrounded by the sport all the time. So there are certain athletes that I've worked with that have zero desire in talking about their respective sports. And that's cool, right? Like, I want to learn about you. Okay. So one of the first questions I ask is, hey, like off the court or off the pitch, like what else are you into? Is it music? Is it movies? Personally, maybe they play golf or they play tennis. Like, I'm just trying to figure out, okay, outside of the game, what kind of human are they? What are they into? What's important to them? Some guys are like, every Sunday they're going to church. That's a huge component of their life. Some are huge family guys, right? Like their wives or their significant others or their kids, they have little babies. Those are the most important things. What I want you to think about is how can you build a bridge and a friendship that extends beyond basketball? And I'll tell you a story to kind of wrap this up. So as I'm working on all of the basketball things right now, right? So again, there's just like the iFast basketball website. I'm working on like a promotional sheet to be able to give to players, coaches, agents, the iFast basketball insiders website. As I'm working on all this, I realize, okay, some of these guys I've been training like 7-8 years now. I've never asked for a testimonial. So, testimonials are great. They're an amazing tool for social proof. And so I asked these guys to do it, and just me being me, I'm reserved. I'm like, hey, if you don't want to do it, I get it, but if you could, it'd be really helpful. Super wishy-washy, which shame on me. I should be better about that. But man, a couple of these guys have sent me like the most amazing testimonials, like just amazing. Like I almost wanted to cry reading a couple of them because I had no idea that I had that level of impact with some of them. And I tell you this because I don't think I would have that same impact if it was just this transactional relationship, right? You come in the gym, I give you a workout, I give you a couple cues, I say goodbye, and you leave. The reason I've gotten these amazing testimonials is because I've just created amazing relationships and bonds. These people are some of my best friends. And I know that might be taboo. And I know there's a lot of coaches that would disagree with that. They say, no, you need this professional distance. And maybe that works for you. It doesn't work for me, right? Like if I'm not 100% invested in you, the human being, then it's impossible for me to be 100% invested in you, the basketball player. So that would be the last thing. It's not an X's and O's thing. It's not coaching, cueing, program design. Just never forget that at the end of the day, we're not just training basketball players or athletes. We're treating and training human beings. So TLDR, right? Or TL didn't listen. I got 10 things. I think they're important. Listen to them now. Number 1, strength is protective. Get in the weight room. Use the weight room as a tool to help make your athletes more resilient and more robust. Number 2, but you have to pick the right exercises, right? Can we please get away from the power cleans, the back squats, and the bench presses? They might have a place, but they shouldn't be the only thing that you do for years and years on it. Number 3, depending on where level they want to get to, they got to have enough juice to play. There's a certain amount of juice you need to play at high school, collegiate, professionally. Part of our job is to try and figure out what do we need to do from a programming perspective to help get them to that level. Number 4, sport-specific movement training is non-negotiable. If you train basketball players, you better understand basketball-specific movements. Teach them how to linear accelerate, decelerate, close out, do a plyo step, shuffle, lateral run, backpedal, all of the things that a basketball player would do on a court. Be able to teach them how to do that in the environment of a weight room or on a court or in a turf area. Number 5, make conditioning worthwhile, right? Please don't let your athletes just smoke themselves with senseless conditioning for no reason. Help them understand what solid conditioning looks like. Help them understand what high and low intensity days are, how to hopefully merge those, consolidate those stressors, and teach them about the value of building a big aerobic base early in their off season. Number 6, learn to distribute force, right? Most of our athletes get shifted forward. Teach them to shift their center of gravity back, distribute forces better, and then teach them how to do that in these integrated movements that they're going to need to do on a court. Number 7, find a player to model unless you're one of one. If you're Zion or Wemby, good for you. The rest of us can dream, but find somebody that looks like you, plays like you, moves like you, and then figure out how can I either model that, make myself more like them, or maybe take their game and expand on it physically. Number 8, for the private sector strength coaches, fill in the gaps. Hey man, if they're going to an advanced PE or weights class at school, that's fine. Hey, let them hang clean, back squat and bench press there. You fill in the gaps with the split stance and single leg work, the upper back work, the posterior chain work, the isolated quad and calf work. Teach them how to move faster. Teach them how to decelerate. All the things they're not getting in that weights class, you can give them when they come into your gym. Number 9, train the breaks. It's not a new thing. This is not novel, but teach your athletes how to decelerate forces vertically, horizontally, and laterally. And then number 10, never forget to connect with the athlete, right? They might love basketball, they might not, but don't make basketball the only thing that ties and unifies you guys together. Figure out who this person is, what drives them, what motivates them, what are they into off the court? Because I guarantee the better your relationship is, the stronger your relationship is, ultimately, the more success you guys are going to have when you get in the weight room. All right, my friend, that does it for this week's episode. Really hope you enjoyed it. If you enjoy this type of content, if you want more content like this, please go to ifastbasketballinsiders.com. Get on that insiders list. When I open the doors June 1st, the first 50 people that sign on are going to get a pretty significant, like a 20% discount on the monthly subscription rate. And I guarantee you this site is going to be fire. I want it to be the absolute best resource for strength and conditioning coaches in basketball space. So if you have not checked it out already, go there right now, ifastbasketballinsiders.com. Second, if you enjoyed this show, whatever platform, whatever device you are on, if you could take 2 seconds out of your day, screenshot it, post it to whatever social media you prefer, other than TikTok, because I'm not on TikTok, but Facebook, X, Instagram, LinkedIn, whatever you consume, or whatever social media platforms you like, post it on there, tag me on it. I will repost as many as I can because look, I'm passionate about basketball. I'm passionate about strength and conditioning. And I think as an industry, it's really time to level up. And I think we can do that. I'd like to think these 10 components would hopefully help you out. So if you would do that, it would be greatly appreciated. So my friend, as always, thank you so much for your support. Love and appreciate you. And we'll be back next week with our next episode. Take care.